Divine greetings, ones and zeros, zeros and ones, boys and girls that are now men and women, kings and queens, gods and goddesses, spiritual beings of this divine matrix. Welcome to this live episode. My name is Clay. And tonight I'm here with the full moon, and I will be talking about transmuting what it is that I'm transmuting in this Aquarius full moon as it relates to vulnerability. That's something that came up for me this full moon. And if you've been watching the lives so far, then you would see that each full moon I do a topic, or sometimes I do several moon days. Greetings, brethren. Good to see you once again also. Definitely good to see you. Inner standing, overstanding. So I'm talking about this full moon, and let me show the fire. It is a pleasure to be here. There's the fire. And as we're in the Aquarius full moon, greetings again, inner standing, overstanding. If you have anything that you would like to ask or share, please feel free to go ahead and put it in the chat. It is a pleasure to welcome your good-hearted comments. So now, the full moon in Aquarius. As I'm going through the full moon in Aquarius, and there's the moon in the backdrop of the fire. As I'm going through the full moon in Aquarius focuses on the we, and the sun is in Leo. The sun focuses, or Leo focuses on the me. So what I'm doing is I'm transmuting the me into the we, and the we into the me, focusing on the we. So, talking about vulnerability, one of the things that I see that happened to me this moon cycle, and I was very watchful this moon cycle, yet still it came about, wherein I found myself consuming someone with my consuming a family member with my, what do you call it, with my louche, with my negative louche, with my egoic aspect of myself. And when I say consuming someone, I mean that I was feeding on their guilt. And as I was feeding on their guilt, I projected my guilt onto them, to make them feel even more guilt until I was satisfied. And this is one of the realities of dealing with the 5D reality. And what is the 5D reality? In the 5D reality of existence, I'm talking about the love frequency of existence. You see your densities. And as you see your densities, you transmute your densities. That is the purpose of being in the 5D frequency. As in the 5D frequency, even though it's the love frequency, it's not all perfect. Everything has its perfection and imperfection. The difference in the love frequency is that you practice love. You practice giving love, and you practice receiving love. And in the practice of love, you have to be vulnerable. And as you practice vulnerability, you get a chance to be invulnerable. Now, in my case, what was happening is that, or what I find happening, because it still happens, is that I was projecting my, um, I don't want to say it that way. It's not that I was projecting my guilt. Initially, the person triggered me with their guilt. So the person was guilty of something. And in them being guilty of the thing, it triggered me. And in me being triggered, I then wanted to feed on the guilt some more. And these are some of the things that we don't realize that we do as humans. And my guilt is coming from my guilt is coming from my motherhood wound. And in the motherhood wound, greetings in the chat, greetings. In the motherhood wound, I the wound that I got, I created an identity around guilt. So whenever I feel guilt, I present a false identity. Whenever I feel guilt from myself, from within, or whenever I see someone being guilty or I feel guilt from that person, I present the false identity to protect myself, which is a form of deception, because that's me being egoic. As I was being egoic, I spewed my injustice onto the other person. And that is what I'm transmuting this full moon. This is what I'm disclosing. This is what I'm being vulnerable about. Because we don't realize how much we do these things. We don't realize how much we feed on each other. Instead of being a generator or generative or being the source to our own light, we feed on each other's light bodies or light energy. And as we feed on each other's light energy, we create these denser frequencies. We promote things like guilt instead of having true pleasure. We promote things like distrust instead of having trust. We promote things like lack of understanding as opposed to understanding. We promote things like shame as opposed to divine will. We promote things like lies as opposed to truth. We promote things like egoic attachments as opposed to freedom and allowance. We promote things like illusions and delusions instead of clarity, instead of reality. So, as I'm seeing in this 5D reality, I'm experiencing the different highs and lows of the love frequency. And this full moon, I'm particularly sharing the freedom of the collective. As I'm sharing the freedom of the collective, what it is that I'm doing is I'm allowing myself to become my collective view. Trustfully, you understand what it is that I'm saying when I say I'm allowing myself to become the collective view, because we have two views of ourselves. We have the inner view and the outer view. So as I in the previous moon cycle was transmuting intimacy with my own spirit, intimacy with others, intimacy intrapersonally and intimacy interpersonally, I'm seeing the need to now reflect upon that transmutation that I did last moon cycle, and bringing in those qualities of intimacy into this moon cycle. In bringing in that intimacy, my spirit is commanding me, or asking me, you could say. I'm very open to its commands. My spirit is asking me to be vulnerable. That is one of the things that is coming up for me. It may not be coming up for you exactly. However, I'm absolutely sure that you can relate to it. And the vulnerability, what is vulnerability? Vulnerability is the willingness to feel the hurt in order to transmute that hurt into pleasure, to transmute that pain into pleasure. Feel the guilt, feel the shame, feel the fear, feel the lies, feel the illusion, feel the delusions, feel the densities. As you feel these different aspects, feel the egoic parts of other people as well as yourself. And as you feel these other parts, there is a temptation by many, such as myself, who has been demonized by my mother and through my own free will, because I allowed it. And by being demonized, I have an appetite for guilt. I have an appetite for guilt, and that appetite for guilt is what I am seeking to eradicate. It's kind of like an alcoholic. An alcoholic has an appetite for alcohol, and the difference between the alcoholic and myself is that in the home or in general, people have guilt. The alcoholic can simply isolate themselves from alcohol and as such not feel or have the temptation in the mind. In my case, as having an appetite for guilt, it is difficult because guilt is all around me. Guilt is even within myself. Guilt is within myself. Guilt is in the family. Guilt is when I'm going to the supermarket. So the guilt is going to be there one way or the other. So it is for me to be vulnerable in receiving the guilt, and in receiving the guilt, not be tempted into consuming the guilt. Because if I consume the guilt, then I lower my frequency, I lower my density. Not only do I lower my density, I have the propensity to transmute, or not transmute, to project that density onto another, for them to feel guilty, so I can feed on what is called the loosh. And let me explain what the loosh is. Loosh is this energy that we produce. We all produce loosh. It is our energy body. We have energy bodies. We have light bodies. We have or what do you call it? Energy bodies, plasma bodies, light bodies. We are self-generative creatures. And as we are self-generative, we produce energy. We consume energy to produce energy. So some people view the energy that we consume only as food, and then you produce physical energy, or the energy to grow, or the energy to sustain and maintain your life, and then you pass that refuse, you defecate. But there is another type of energy also. There is light energy information that you consume. Some of it is even considered as knowledge. Some of it is understanding. Some of it is wisdom. As you consume this light energy information, there's different types of light energy information. There is high quality light energy information, and there's low quality. The low quality is referred to as the densest, and then the high quality is related to or referred to as high frequency. As you consume this light energy information, that is the loosh that you produce yourself. So you can feed on yourself. You can feed on your sorrow. Sometimes you hear people saying, oh, that person is depressed. And someone will say they've been depressed for so long that they feed on their own sorrow. And people efficiently relate to someone who is feeding on their own sorrow. So this is what I'm saying, that you can feed on sorrow, you can feed on grief, you can feed on guilt, you can feed on a person's lies. You can feed on injustice. You can feed on malice. You can feed on porn. You can feed on um, many different types of densities, as well as you can feed on the high frequency. You can feed on true pleasure. You can feed on divine will. You can feed on understanding. You can feed on knowledge. You can feed on, and when I say knowledge, I'm referring to the faith faculty. You can feed on wisdom. You can feed on clarity. You can feed on reality. You can feed on allowance, because in the allowance there is constant nutrients. There's the highest form of nutrients in the allowance of things, as opposed to the resistance of things. Where there is heavy resistance, there is heavy densities. Where there is clear allowance, it is frequency that is best for the light being. It is frequency that is best for the light body. These are the melodies that I'm talking about when I'm talking about frequency and high frequencies. As it relates to the guilt that I was talking about and vulnerability, I am doing my very best to remove the blockages within my light body so as not to shrink myself into those densities. However, I do accept, acknowledge, and allow my spirit to bring to me when it is that I'm not being vulnerable. And sometimes there are casualties of love. So the person that I projected on, I would call that a casualty of love, even though it may not seem like a casualty of love to that person, because they have to feel it as well as I have to feel it. We both have to feel it. And as I relate to the toxic nature of things, I am seeing where I'm reducing the toxicity of my encounters. Reducing the toxicity is very much related to how dense the atmosphere is. You could say how close in proximity the light being is being to the filth that is being generated. So at this moment, I'm going to once again ask those in the chat to create questions that come up in their minds. Well-to-do questions, well-hearted questions. So now, and also, if there's anything that is not clear, please feel free to reiterate or to put it in the chat so I can reiterate, so I can clarify if possible. And at this time, I'm going to show the fire again. I do love to show the fire because I do love the fire, the transmuting fire. With the transmuting fire, there is the moon. There she is, the beautiful moon, as my tides, as my emotions have raised in my body. Once again, this moon cycle. And as I'm talking about the raising of the emotional body, I'm seeing that men have a cycle. At least as a man, I have noticed a cycle within me. And when I checked Google related, or Google gave me some information that said that it's quite possible that I began experiencing this appetite for guilt on a full moon. And when you've done it at least twice, then the body remembers. And every full moon, you will then have that appetite for guilt if you've been guilted on a full moon, as it is the highest point for your emotional body. And I'm seeing that that is absolutely true, as well as I will mention that every male has this feature, has this faculty of pleasure within them. And during the full moon, it is my truth, it is my understanding that during the full moon, pleasures are heightened because of the emotional body. So, because of the emotional body, pleasures are heightened. And Inner Standing, Nova Standing says, I do too love the fire. And I appreciate that love for the fire, in that we share a similarity, in that we share a heart coherence, in that we share a love coherence. As I'm mentioning the frequencies, as I'm mentioning the frequencies of love, it brings to mind that there are two people in here, and as there are two people in here according to Google, I am feeling very satisfied. I'm feeling very satisfied as a male. This says to me in my pleasure faculty that at least two people is willing to share what it is that I am saying. And though I am the speaker of the message, I'm trusting that within those two people, within that one person, there is the reciprocation of the measures of pleasure. And as I was saying, as a male, this happens at its highest point every month. So one of the ways that people seek this is to have sexual intercourse during the full moon season. And if you've done that once or twice, you will find yourself wanting to do that during the full moon cycle. And that can pose a problem. That can pose a definite problem. And I'm seeing that in my past life, I used to have a ritual of doing so because of the nature of our culture to practice sexual intercourse during the heightened full moon. And that has carried over into this life, where as I brought in the densities of a past life, that those densities of the past life is now being corrected by me. So every full moon is a high charge potency time for me. And the aspect of guilt is brought out, the faculty of guilt is brought out tremendously. As that faculty of guilt is brought out tremendously, this is where I'm now seeing that I have an appetite for guilt. As I have this appetite for guilt, it is being shown to me that I need to practice pleasureful things on the benevolent scale. As I practice benevolent pleasure, as pleasure is truly benevolent, the only true pleasure is benevolent. I'm saying benevolent just to clarify whether or not, because some people think that pleasure is pleasure. However, there is benevolent pleasure and there's malevolent pleasure. So I want to make it clear that I'm referring to benevolent pleasure when I say practice pleasure. And what is benevolent pleasure? Benevolent pleasure is pleasure that is high frequency pleasure. Pleasure that is not based in low density. Pleasure that comes through the love frequency. Pleasure that does not resist. As I'm broadcasting this live right now, I'm having a certain sense of pleasure within me. And I'm going to turn the camera back around. So, as I was saying, that what I have found is that not only women have a menstrual cycle, men have a cycle. I'm not sure what the correct terminology is, if there is a scientific terminology or a cultural terminology for what it is that men experience when they encounter these cycles every month. Um, Google mentioned something that is, in a sense, ridiculous, because instead of clarifying, instead of seeing that men have a pleasure cycle every month, Google attributed it, or the scientists that Google is referencing, attributed this emotional outburst that men have to the environment. So they said that usually the male has to deal with deadlines at work, has to deal with the woman's menstrual cycle, has to deal with the high pressures in the work environment, or the high pressures in the political environment, or the high pressures in the wartime environment. And this is what causes the man to have a regular outburst every monthly cycle, which I find to be ridiculous, hilarious even, because instead of seeing that there's an internal wound, I'm going to retract that statement. Instead of saying that it is ridiculous, it is understandable, because they are in their ignorance. Now that I'm not in my ignorance, I can see where it is very much plausible that they refer things the way they refer things. However, in my experience, I'm seeing that it's because of the wounds that we have. The wounds that we have will dictate whether we have a guilt-free moon cycle or not. And if there's anyone in the chat who has taken the time to evaluate themselves, evaluate their emotional body, and have noticed that during the moon cycle they do find themselves doing weird things, having weird appetites, having weird, some people may even have fetishes. And I'm reminded here by my spirit to mention that the psych wards are especially active during the full moon. During the full moon, medications may need to rise, security may need to tighten. There are special arrangements dedicated to full moons in the institutions. So this is a well-documented scientific truth that the body, the emotions rise during the full moons. And I'm reminded of those movies where you see on the full moon the wolves howling at the moons, or these creatures coming out at the moon. What it is pointed to is that the human becomes this exceptional creature during the full moon. It's talking about the subconscious mind. It's talking about the truth that the subconscious mind is elevated to a point where it defies the normal, acceptable human cultural environment. And so they develop stories. People go missing during the full moon. Weird things happen during the full moon. And what it is that I am saying is that on this full moon, I am noticing my appetite for guilt. And I'm noticing this appetite for guilt to change that appetite for guilt. Let me show the fire again. And there is the full moon again. So I'm doing my soul work as a 5D being in noticing that there is an appetite within my light vessel for guilt. And in noticing that appetite for guilt, that is the first step to removing that appetite. Because if I don't remove the appetite for guilt, then it's going to continuously lower my frequency. And it's going to drive me insane. It's going to make me revert to an insane condition, which schizophrenia, the condition which I broke through into the 5D realm of existence through schizophrenia, I will be lowered back into an insane state. And this is where I'm going to take a break, and I trust that if there's anyone in the chat who has anything to say at this moment, they will go ahead and say it. I am seeing where I have spent the currency that I have in vulnerability, in transmuting this live, in opening this portal, and I am going to close this portal shortly. It has been a pleasure transmuting this live. It has been a pleasure uncovering what it is that I have found in my light body. It has been a joy to represent human consciousness on a 5D scale. Inner standing overstanding is asking how to remove yourself from guilt. What I have found is, this is how I'm interpreting your question. How to remove yourself from guilt is to not remove myself from the environment. If you can remove yourself from an environment, a toxic environment, then physically, then you should, because it would be, because proximity to toxicity does play a role in how you become reinfected after you've removed the infection from yourself. Now, in having the wound is what the guilt is. So I'm interpreting your question to say how to remove the wound. And how you remove the wound, how you remove the guilt, is by accepting, firstly, that you do have the guilt. In accepting first that you have the wound or you have the guilt, then you can identify the guilt. You can give it a name. As you give it the name, then wherever or whenever it shows up, you will be able to identify the emotion of guilt. And then once you've begun identifying the guilt, then you can begin to work with the varying types of guilt and how to remove the varying types of guilt. How I work with the guilt is through the chakra system, because guilt is a function of the sacral chakra, which is the second chakra as you go up from the earth, or as you go up from the root. And guilt is taken in two measures. Guilt comes through the fear frequency, and the other measure is pleasure, which comes through the love frequency. So beautiful. A short way of saying how to remove the guilt is to say, find true pleasure. As you find true pleasure, that true pleasure will remove the guilt. As you find true pleasure, that true pleasure will remove the guilt. In my case, I found that I was taking pleasure in someone else being guilty. And as that person showed their guilt or presented their guilt, I would guilt them even further. So I would start feeding on that person, eating their guilt and projecting their guilt back onto them. Now, what happens, or the corrective measure that I have taken, is to see that that is a self-consuming event, and also I am defiling the other person. So whenever I feel that guilt, and that guilt is the guilt of my 18-year-old, the guilt of my 18-year-old thinking that it has not received all that it should have received in me growing up. And in me naming it the 18-year-old, whenever I get that feeling of guilt, I know what it is. I know that that is the 18-year-old wanting to be egoic, wanting to prove itself, not knowing itself. Because guilt is a function of the false identity. Guilt is a function of you not knowing yourself. Guilt is a function that comes about to protect an identity. So whenever I feel the 18-year-old in the way that I feel it in the guilty sense, then I know that I am operating demonically. And the moment I know that I am operating demonically, I stop and I breathe. And as I stop and I breathe, I remind myself that I am love, I am light, I am truth, I am beauty, I am goodness. And that is one of the ways that I work within my mind to remain in a high frequency. So in accepting that the thing is guilt, and in accepting that I've named it accordingly, in accepting that the thing that I have named accordingly is an illusion of myself, I project myself to be the reality. And in projecting myself to be the reality, I further cleanse my aura by knowing that I am the truth. And it is only in the truth that I have existence. So I know that that 18-year-old feeling of guilt is an illusion. I know that I'm being an illusionary person. I know that depending on what it is, I am deluded of myself. I know that I am being crazy. And this is one of the ways of how to remove yourself from guilt. This is the way that one of the ways that I have found that has worked. And I trust that that answered your question somewhat. And being that I am having a bit of time, I'm going to sit for a moment, and if you have anything else. Okay, Inner Standing said, gratefully give thanks. I am grateful to be able to explain what it is that I have experienced in a way that you find it grateful. And trust that if there's anything else, it would be a joy for me to expound on what it is that I've experienced. And, you know, I would ask you this question. Is there anything that you have experienced that is that resonates, that you care to share? Okay, I'm going to put some more wood on the fire. like this. In a stand it says, yes, I as well. These are the things that I find interesting in my life, because before, I'm currently 44, before 38, I was not aware of these things. And it wasn't until sometime in my recovery that I became aware of the emotions that I have.
You're talking, I can't hear you.
No, I wasn't. I'm going to share the fire with you.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's so sad. What happened to Laura tonight? Where's she at? Girl.
So, yeah, it wasn't until I was 38, after having the schizophrenic experience, that I actually cracked into my soul. Before then, I was an NPC, what in the spiritual community is called an NPC, a non-participating consciousness. And what that means is that I was purely egoic. In another sense, you could say I was purely demonic. Of course, the light body is never totally infected. And maybe, yeah, it's never totally infected. It is never without some inkling of faith. As corrupted as it may be, it is not my understanding that anyone is beyond faith. Once you have an inkling of faith, which in my schizophrenic psychotic episode, in my psychosis, I came face to face with my fear, with some of my fears, and instead of committing suicide, I decided to simply sit still. And at that point, you know, I faced my demons. And it is with the help of spirituality, spirituality is really the explanation of why it is we came here. And after a while, I was able to tap into my own soul, and the voices that I was hearing, I recognized that those were the confused portions of myself, that I do actually have an inner voice. Before schizophrenia, I never heard myself. I never heard the spirit speak within me. I would think of something, but I would never hear my own voice, the voice of the spirit, or you could say, which it is true, the voice of God, because we are co-creators. As co-creators, we hear the voice of God, one way or the other. Some people physically hear the auditory voice, some people feel the auditory voice. Some people sense the auditory voice in one way, shape, or the other. In the schizophrenia that I experienced, I heard voices. So even now, I do hear voices. The difference between having the schizophrenic outbreak and having this reality is that I know that when I'm having the outbreak, it's not all my voices. Sometimes it's an outside voice, or sometimes the voices are my voices, but they're more fragmented, which they're in an argumentative state as opposed to harmony. So before schizophrenia, I had no idea about this aspect of life, this side of life. I had no awareness that life could be like this. that I could feel other people's aura, that I could sense other people's guilt, that I could feel someone else's shame the way that I do, that I could hear someone's lies. I can hear their auric field telling me that they're lying. These are the gifts of tapping into the soul, because the soul is more akin to the astral body, and the astral body is not the physical body. The astral body is that body which is not tangible, and it works kind of like how we have Wi-Fi, because you can't see the vibrations, you can't see the frequencies, but they are there. Science has confessed or has found out that in measuring brain waves, you can measure a person's thoughts, or maybe not measure the person's thought, but you can tell when the person is going to speak, and the instruments that they are using are not touching the person's mental. It's not touching the person's brain. So they're seeing that your thoughts that you're creating are existing outside of your skull in the matter of what they would call the cloud. Just like now, you can store things in the cloud from your phone or from any device. And where is the cloud? It's in the ethers. So that is what I would share in this transmission, in this beautiful transmission. It is a joy to speak the truth and speak it ever. It is a joy to see, witness, embody love lighting the truth and have it flow from my being. And I would say thank you for joining me in the 5D love frequency. As I close this portal and trust that life finds you well. Ashe and amen.